Have you ever wondered what happens when love turns into revenge? What if he only married her to fulfill a plan, and the shocking truth came out at the altar? This story will keep you on the edge of your seat, revealing secrets, betrayal, and unexpected twists. Listen closely to learn how sometimes the deepest pain leads to the strongest courage. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you won't miss the next unforgettable story. She never thought love would find her at the grocery store. Yet there he was, smiling as he helped her pick up the apples she dropped. Something about the way he looked at her made everything else feel quiet. From that moment, it was like the world had slowed down just for them. She'd had her share of disappointments, sure, but this felt different. It wasn't about butterflies or dramatic sparks. It was calm, magnetic, like a whisper saying, "This is it." And sometimes, that's all it takes, a small act, a glance, and suddenly, the heart leans in. He wasn't just handsome. He was intentional. The kind of man who asked how her day really was, and actually listened. The kind who'd text her when she didn't expect it, not with dry, WIDs, but with thoughtful messages that made her smile at stoplights. He opened doors, not just literally, but emotionally. She felt seen. Heard. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she had to shrink to be loved. He admired her strength. Encouraged her dreams. And that's a kind of romance that can be addictive. They spent hours talking about everything and nothing. About childhood memories, favorite movies, the smell of rain. He'd share stories about his dog growing up or the time he got lost in the subway. She laughed in ways she hadn't in years. The conversation flowed so effortlessly, like two souls that had just picked up where they left off in another life. She caught herself checking her phone more often, waiting for his name to pop up. Every message felt like a warm hand on her shoulder, like comfort in digital form. He had this way of making ordinary moments feel sacred. A drive through backroads turned into a memory. Rainy days became an excuse to make pancakes and dance barefoot in the kitchen. She'd been in relationships before, but never like this. With him, love wasn't chaos, it was clarity. She'd once believed that passion meant pain, but this felt like healing. Like finding shelter in someone's presence. And when you've gone through storms, shelter feels like a miracle. It didn't take long for her to start dreaming. Dreaming of weekend road trips, cozy apartments, shared playlists, and lazy Sunday mornings. Dreaming of being chosen without conditions. She began to imagine what her name would sound like with his last name. She'd never admit that out loud, of course. Not yet. But those thoughts crept in when she least expected. Like during long showers, or while folding laundry, wondering what it would be like to build a home with him. Her friends noticed the glow before she even said anything. "You look different," they told her. And she did. Love will do that to a person, it softens the edges. It makes you show up to the world with a little more light. She started smiling with her eyes again. Picking songs with lyrics that suddenly made sense. Even her coffee tasted better. That's the funny thing about new love. It spills into every part of your life like a scent you can't wash off. But she wasn't naive. She'd been hurt before, and she wasn't about to fall for illusions. So, she watched. She paid attention. Did he show up when it mattered? Did his words match his actions? Every time, he did. And every time, it made her heart relax a little more. People say you just know when something's real. She never believed that, until now. And maybe, just maybe, this was the real thing she had always heard about but never actually found. It wasn't just how he treated her, it was how he made her treat herself. She started speaking up more. Wearing what made her feel good. Saying no without guilt. He never made her feel like she was too much. In fact, he made her feel like she was finally enough. That kind of love doesn't shout, it shows up. It holds your hand in silence. It remembers your coffee order. It sends you articles about the things you care about. That's what she was falling for, not just the man, but the way she felt around him. And so, slowly, she let herself believe. Believe that after everything, love could look like this. That it didn't have to be dramatic to be real. That maybe fate was a thing. After all, how else could she explain this sudden twist in her story? A heart that once felt like a locked room was opening again. And just as she was learning to trust this new chapter, something she hadn't considered began to take shape in the background. At first, it didn't seem like a red flag. Some people just don't like talking about the past, right? Everyone has chapters they'd rather skip. That's what she told herself when he gave short answers or deflected questions about his childhood or old relationships. Maybe he'd been through something painful. Maybe he was just private. But there was a quiet tension behind his smile every time she asked. Like the air changed just a little. Like her curiosity tapped on a door he had no intention of opening. She noticed it most during deep conversations. When she opened up about her high school heartbreak or her father's illness, he'd hold her hand, nod gently, and change the subject. Not abruptly, but deliberately. It was subtle. Thoughtful, even. But always there. The pattern began to repeat. Anytime she tried to connect through shared vulnerability, he'd reroute the dialogue back to her. And while that made her feel seen, it also left a space where his story should have been. He had no social media. No old photos in his phone. No childhood friends who ever texted. At dinner with her friends, when they asked him where he grew up, his answers were vague. He never said a city, just a state. When they asked about siblings, he shrugged, "It's complicated." The more they pressed, the more he joked to dodge. And while laughter can hide a lot, it can't erase intuition. That unsettled feeling began to whisper louder. She tried to respect it. She really did. Everyone has their own timeline for trust. And she knew that not all healing looks the same. But love without context starts to feel like building on sand. She found herself filling in the blanks with assumptions. Was he ashamed of something? Running from someone? Or maybe, hiding something bigger than pain? Trust isn't just about loyalty, it's about honesty. And without that, even the most beautiful love starts to tremble underneath. One evening, while folding laundry in his apartment, she found an old photograph half tucked into a drawer. A woman beside him, smiling. A young child between them. The back of the photo read only a date, 6 years ago. She didn't ask about it right away. Instead, she waited. To see if he'd ever bring it up. He didn't. And that silence was louder than any confession. It gnawed at her. Not because of jealousy, but because of what it meant. A piece of his life was hidden, and he didn't trust her enough to share it. The more she noticed, the more questions surfaced. The late night calls he always took in the hallway. The long weekend where he said he was visiting an old friend, but returned with new tension in his shoulders. And every time she tried to ask about it, his eyes darkened just a little. Like he was preparing for battle. The kind of battle that starts with a single sentence and ends with someone walking away. So she stopped asking. But silence never makes confusion disappear. It just buries it deeper. What she didn't realize then was how much that silence would shape her. How it would make her second-guess herself. Replay every conversation looking for clues. She began watching his reactions more closely than his words. Measuring pauses. Noticing when he blinked too often. The uncertainty slowly chipped away at her peace. And when peace starts to crumble in a relationship, everything else starts to feel unstable. Even the things that once felt safe. She told herself it was fine. That maybe she didn't need to know everything. People change, right? We all outgrow old chapters. But in her heart, she knew that love isn't about knowing everything, it's about being willing to share. Vulnerability isn't weakness. It's an offering. And when someone refuses to offer anything back, it leaves you holding all the weight of the connection. That weight was getting heavy, and she didn't know how long she could carry it alone. Still, she stayed. Because when you fall in love with someone's presence, you try to make peace with their silence. You try to trust what you feel, even when the facts are blurry. But feelings, as powerful as they are, aren't always protection. And sometimes, the truth doesn't knock. It sneaks in slowly. Through small cracks. Through nights where something feels off but can't be named. Through whispers that grow louder each day, until they're impossible to ignore. It was a quiet evening in October when he asked. No big crowd, no photographers, just the two of them in the kitchen, the scent of garlic bread in the air, and a playlist softly playing in the background. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a simple velvet box, and asked her to be his forever. No grand speech. Just a look so steady it made her chest ache. Her eyes welled up. Her hands trembled. And even though part of her brain whispered, "Wait, is it too soon?" her lips moved first and said, "Yes." They had only been dating for 5 months. Most people would call that reckless. Some would even call it foolish. But when you've been starving for affection, even a sip of something that feels like love can feel like a full meal. And that's what she felt with him, full. Seen. Like the emptiness she once carried was finally being filled with warmth and belonging. It felt like a shortcut to a life she'd always dreamed of, someone who chose her without hesitation. The news spread fast. Friends texted her with exclamation points and emojis. Family members asked when the big day would be. Her mother cried, overjoyed that her daughter had finally found her person. No one voiced what some of them were surely thinking, that it was all happening too fast. Too intense. Too soon to know if it would last. But people don't always speak their concerns when everyone else is busy celebrating a fairy tale. Still, there were moments when she questioned it. When she'd lie awake at night and think about how much they hadn't talked about yet. Finances. Children. Religion. The hard stuff. They hadn't even met each other's extended families. She didn't know his credit score. He didn't know about the panic attacks she used to hide. But she told herself that love isn't a checklist. That the real stuff would come after the yes. That if they were meant to build a life together, they'd figure it out brick by brick. And so, the planning began. She toured venues with her best friend, tasted cakes, tried on gowns. Every part of it felt surreal, like watching someone else's life through a filter. She smiled for photos, but deep down, there was a quiet hum of doubt. Not a scream. Not a panic. Just a hum, like the sound your fridge makes in the middle of the night. You can ignore it, but it's always there. And it makes you wonder if something's not working the way it should. He, on the other hand, seemed all in. Almost too in. He picked out napkin colors. Helped write the vows. Said yes to every vendor she chose. Never disagreed. Never pushed back. And while some would call that supportive, she started to wonder, was he agreeing because he loved her? Or because he had a different plan altogether? Love that runs too smoothly can feel suspicious when you've been through storms before. It starts to feel like someone's hiding the thunder. One night, while finalizing the guest list, she noticed something strange. He had no one to invite. No friends from college. No co-workers. No cousins. Just a few names scribbled down with no last names attached. When she asked, he said he preferred to keep things small. But it didn't feel like preference. It felt like concealment. Like someone who'd spent years hiding, and wasn't ready to be found. That hum of doubt grew a little louder. Still, she clung to the idea that maybe this was just how his love looked. Quiet. Focused. All about her. After all, wasn't that what every girl dreamed of? A man who only had eyes for her. Who made her the center of his world. But obsession can wear the same mask as devotion. And what she mistook for intensity may have been something else entirely, something calculated. Something rehearsed. Something that had nothing to do with love at all. She didn't see it then. Or maybe she didn't want to. When someone gives you what you've always prayed for, it's hard to question it. It feels ungrateful. Disloyal to your own hope. And yet, in the back of her mind, one question kept pressing its fingers into her chest. If it's real, why does it feel like it's racing towards something I don't understand? The church smelled like old wood and lilies, the kind of scent that clings to memory. As she walked down the aisle during the rehearsal, veil in hand and laughter in the air, she tried to hold on to the magic of the moment. But then she saw it. A look. Quick, but sharp, between him and one of the bridesmaids. Not just any bridesmaid. Her cousin, Ellie. Their eyes met like they were finishing a sentence no one else could hear. And in that split second, something in her stomach twisted. It was easy to brush off. Weddings are stressful. Emotions run high. People act weird. That's what she told herself as she straightened her dress and kept walking. But as the practice ceremony moved forward, her eyes kept drifting back to the two of them. Ellie barely spoke. He avoided looking her way again. And that silence between them. It was too controlled. Too careful. Like people who were either hiding something, or trying not to let something slip. Later, while everyone laughed over champagne and cupcakes in the church hall, she noticed it again. Ellie and her fiancé standing too far apart to be close, too awkward to be strangers. And every time she walked past them, the room tensed, just slightly. It was like walking into a conversation that had been paused mid-sentence. People don't fake that kind of tension. Not well, at least. It shows in their body language. The way their shoulders stiffen. The way their laughter comes half a second too late. When she asked him if everything was okay, he smiled like nothing was wrong. Just nervous about tomorrow, he said, kissing her forehead. But the kiss didn't feel like the others. It was light. Distracted. Like someone checking a box. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But the way Ellie rushed out after the rehearsal dinner without saying goodbye. That didn't sit right. Not for someone who'd flown in just for the wedding. She tried to talk to Ellie the next morning, but her calls went to voicemail. Her cousin had always been reserved, but not like this. Not when they were little girls braiding each other's hair, whispering secrets under blankets. The sudden coldness felt deliberate. And it hurt. She found herself staring at the bridesmaid dress hanging by the window, wondering if Ellie would even show up at all. Wondering if she should call the whole thing off, just for a second. But fear of being dramatic kept her quiet. She didn't want to be the crazy bride. The one who overanalyzes. Overreacts. Reads too much into things. Society has a way of silencing women by labeling their intuition as paranoia. So she smiled through it. Forced laughter. Nodded politely when people told her she was glowing. But inside, her thoughts were racing. Not about flowers or centerpieces, but about glances. And silence. And that feeling in her gut that just wouldn't go away. She told herself she'd confront it after the wedding. Give it space. Let it pass. She wanted to enjoy the day, not ruin it with questions that might not even have answers. But avoidance is like debt, it always collects interest. And even though she danced and posed for pictures, her heart never quite settled. It's a strange thing to feel alone when surrounded by people who love you. But that's exactly how she felt, like everyone was celebrating something she wasn't entirely sure was real. And yet, part of her still hoped that it was nothing. That maybe she was just tired. That maybe her cousin was dealing with her own issues. That her soon-to-be husband was simply overwhelmed. She clung to that version of the story like it was a life raft. Because to consider the other version, the one where something was going on between them, was too painful. Too messy. Too close to a betrayal she wasn't ready to name out loud. But sometimes, the things we ignore in the daylight come back louder in the dark. And as the wedding day crept closer, that feeling, like something sacred had been stepped on, only grew stronger. Not with proof. Not with facts. Just with a feeling she couldn't explain, yet. It was almost midnight. She couldn't sleep, too much adrenaline, too many thoughts, too many what-ifs dancing in her head. So she got up, wandered through the dim apartment, and sat on the couch with a mug of herbal tea. His phone buzzed on the table. Just once. She wasn't the kind to snoop. She believed in trust. But something, call it intuition, call it divine timing, made her glance at the screen. A message preview. From a name she didn't recognize. And it read, "She has no idea. After tomorrow, it's over. For her and her whole family." Her breath caught. Her heart paused. The kind of pause that doesn't come from fear, but recognition. Like a puzzle piece finally locking into place. She stared at the message, numb, unsure if she was awake or still dreaming. It didn't make sense. Who would say that? What did it mean? Her hands trembled as she tapped the notification, expecting to find a misunderstanding. A joke. Something she could laugh off later. But instead, there it was, an audio message. And her name was in it. She pressed play. A man's voice. Confident. Cold. It's done. She thinks it's love. She thinks she's winning. After tomorrow, it's over. For her brother, for all of them. Then a laugh. Quiet. Satisfied. Her fiancé's laugh. She knew that laugh. Not the one he used in public. The one he used behind closed doors, when he was fully himself. And in that moment, the illusion shattered. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a mistake. It was a mask slipping, mid-sentence. Her hands were ice. Her legs felt hollow. She sat in silence, the audio still echoing in her ears, wondering how long this had been going on. Was everything fake? Every word, every touch, every promise. Her mind flooded with memories now painted in new, colder colors. The night he cried while holding her. The way he kissed her hand after arguments. The whisper of a forever when she least expected it. Was that all part of the plan? She tried to breathe, but her chest was tight. She looked around the room, the flowers, the boxes labeled wedding favors, the photo of them laughing at the lake, and suddenly everything felt foreign. Like walking into a stranger's house that looked like hers. She felt like a guest in her own story. And somewhere between rage and heartbreak, she whispered a question she didn't expect. What did I do to deserve this? And that's what betrayal does. It makes you blame yourself for someone else's deception. It rewrites your worth in past tense. She started asking herself impossible questions. Was I too easy to manipulate? Too desperate for love? Did I ignore the signs? Because deep down, she knew the truth didn't start with that message, it started long before. In the glances. The silences. The pieces she tried to force into a fairy tale. But now, the fairy tale was dead. And the girl who had once believed in magic was now standing knee-deep in reality. Cold. Sharp. Cruel. She didn't cry. Not yet. The tears would come later. Right now, she was frozen. Shock has a way of protecting the body from complete collapse. It keeps you still, lets the truth settle before the fall. And in that stillness, one thought kept echoing in her mind: this man is not who I thought he was. Still, she didn't wake him. She didn't scream. She just sat there, listening to the message again. And again. And again. As if repetition would dull the blade of it. But it never did. It only cut deeper. Because each time she heard his voice, it reminded her that this wasn't just a betrayal of love, it was a betrayal of trust. And sometimes, that hurts even more. And as the night faded into morning, and the first light touched the curtains, she was left with one terrifying question that had no clear answer: what happens tomorrow? The church doors stood wide open, welcoming a sea of expectant faces, all dressed to witness a love story unfolding, or so they thought. She stood backstage, veil in hand, heart pounding like a wild drum. Her dress shimmered under the soft lights, but inside, a storm raged. Doubt gnawed at her like an unwelcome guest, whispering questions she couldn't silence. Was this really the man she thought she knew? Could she trust the words that would soon be spoken? Every step toward the altar felt like walking a tightrope. Her hands trembled slightly, betraying the calm she tried to show. The music swelled, filling the room with promises of forever. Yet, inside her mind, the past and the present clashed violently. Memories of laughter and whispered secrets mixed with the cold voice from the audio message she had heard the night before. It was as if two worlds were colliding, hope and fear, love and betrayal, wrestling for control of her soul. She glanced at the faces in the pews, family, friends, loved ones, all radiating joy and anticipation. They believed in this moment as much as she did once. She wondered what they'd think if they knew the storm brewing beneath her smile. Would they understand? Would they pity her? Or worse, would they think she was crazy for walking down that aisle at all? The weight of their expectations pressed down, making the choice even harder. The footsteps behind her echoed, signaling it was almost time. Her breath hitched. In her mind, she played the tape of every conversation, every glance that had suddenly felt strange. She thought of Ellie's evasive behavior, the silences, the late-night phone calls. Her heart ached with confusion and fear, but somewhere deep inside, a flicker of hope refused to die. The hope that maybe this was all a terrible misunderstanding, a dark cloud passing through an otherwise bright sky. She had spent so long dreaming of this day, the white dress, the flowers, the vows. And now, standing on the edge of forever, she realized how fragile those dreams really were. Love isn't always the grand declarations or perfect moments captured in photos. Sometimes, it's the courage to face uncertainty with an open heart. To walk forward even when your legs shake. To hope when your mind screams to run. Her hands gripped the bouquet a little tighter as the doors slowly began to close behind her. Every face she passed reminded her of what was at stake, not just her happiness, but the fragile trust she'd tried to build. She wished she could rewind time, ask the questions she'd held back, peel back the layers to find the truth. But life rarely offers second chances like that. You take the steps you have to, even if they lead you into the unknown. As she reached the altar, their eyes met. For a brief second, she saw a softness there, a promise she longed to believe in. But behind it, something else lurked. A guardedness she couldn't decipher. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to smile, to play her part. Because sometimes, the hardest thing is pretending everything's okay when your heart knows otherwise. And just as the priest prepared to speak, a voice inside her whispered, "Hold on. The truth is closer than you think." The moment she had feared was finally here. What would come next would change everything. The church fell silent, the weight of the moment pressing down like a heavy curtain. Everyone's eyes were on them, the bride in her shimmering dress, the groom standing tall but with a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. The priest's voice echoed through the chapel, calm and steady. Do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Time slowed. Hearts beat loud. She held her breath, waiting for the answer that would seal their future. Then, his smile broke through the stillness. But it wasn't the smile she'd imagined. It was cold. Sharp. The kind that doesn't reach the eyes. No, he said, clear and unshaken. A hush fell. Confusion rippled through the crowd. Murmurs, gasps. The man she thought she knew was unraveling right before her. This was never about love, he continued, his voice steady, filled with something darker than hate. I married her to destroy her family. Shock crashed over her like a tidal wave. The story she had been told, the promises whispered in the dark, all dissolved into bitter truth. He spoke of revenge, of years spent plotting because her brother had ruined his life. Her name wasn't spoken with affection, but with bitterness, like a weapon. She realized then she wasn't a bride. She was a pawn. A mask in a game designed to hurt the people she loved most. The altar became a stage for betrayal. The crowd stared, stunned and silent. She felt the world tilt beneath her feet. The weight of humiliation settled deep into her bones. Her mother's sobs echoed in the background. Friends gasped, some looked away, unable to meet her eyes. In that moment, she was exposed, raw and trembling, as if every secret and lie had been ripped open for all to see. But somewhere in the pain, a seed of clarity began to sprout. She saw her own reflection in the eyes of the people around her, not as a victim, but as someone betrayed by a cruel fate. That moment was a turning point, even if she didn't realize it then. When trust shatters like glass, the pieces don't just cut you, they show you the truth of who's holding the knife. And now, she was forced to see who he really was, and who she needed to become. As he finished speaking, his gaze didn't waver from hers. There was no remorse. No regret. Only the cold satisfaction of a plan fulfilled. But she felt something else stirring deep inside, a mix of anger and something far more powerful, awakening. Because sometimes, it's in the darkest moments that the brightest truths are born. And this was her moment. She realized this wasn't the end of her story. It was a cruel beginning, yes, but a beginning nonetheless. The altar was no longer a symbol of union, it was a battleground. And she had just been handed a choice, to crumble or to rise. The crowd held its breath, waiting for her next move. And though she felt shattered, somewhere inside, she knew she would find her strength. In that silence, her heart began to beat again. Not for him, but for herself. For the woman who refused to be defined by betrayal. For the life she still deserved. The altar confession was a brutal awakening, but it was also a call to reclaim her story, her power, and her future. And just as the echoes of his words faded, a new chapter whispered from the shadows, one where she wouldn't just survive, but thrive. The real fight was only beginning. The room was thick with silence, heavy and suffocating. Her legs gave way as the shock of his words hit like a thunderclap. The world spun, the faces around her blurring into shadows as tears welled up, uninvited and unstoppable. Her knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, the weight of betrayal too much to carry any longer. Every whispered prayer, every hopeful dream shattered in an instant. She felt exposed, naked not just in body, but in soul. Her mother rushed forward, hands trembling as she tried to catch her daughter, but the pain was too deep, too raw. Friends stood frozen, some with tears streaming, others with disbelief etched across their faces. The woman who had smiled so brightly just moments ago was now crumpled, broken before their eyes. The room felt colder, emptier. The joyous celebration turned into a scene of heartbreak and disbelief. It was a moment none of them would forget. In the middle of the chaos, she felt the sting of humiliation, like a spotlight had been shoved on all her flaws, her mistakes, her trust. The humiliation wasn't just about his betrayal, but about the shattering of her own self-image. She had believed in a future with him, in a love that would protect her. Now, that belief was crushed, leaving her vulnerable in front of everyone she cared about. It was a public undoing of the private dreams she had nurtured. Yet, amid the tears and broken pieces, something inside her flickered. A quiet, stubborn spark that refused to be snuffed out by shame or sorrow. It was a seed of resilience, growing silently beneath the rubble. She realized that this collapse, as painful as it was, didn't have to be the end of her story. Sometimes, breaking down is the first step toward building something new. Something stronger. Her mind raced through memories, both beautiful and painful, as she clung to that tiny spark. She remembered advice from mentors, books she'd read about overcoming heartbreak, stories of others who'd risen from ruins. People like Elizabeth Gilbert, who found joy after devastation, or Maya Angelou, who taught that strength comes from the deepest wounds. This wasn't her defeat, it was her chance to rewrite the narrative. The faces around her slowly came back into focus. Some offered hands, others stayed silent but close. It was then she understood, she was not alone. Pain may isolate, but healing often starts with the support we allow in. Sometimes, letting others hold your broken pieces can help you start to put yourself back together, piece by piece. It's not weakness, it's courage. As she lifted her head, wiping tears away, she felt a fragile sense of determination. The betrayal had torn her apart, but it hadn't destroyed her. And while she didn't yet know the path forward, one thing was clear, she would not stay on the floor. Not this time. There was a fight brewing within, fueled by the very pain that had tried to consume her. And so, as the murmurs of shock faded and the chapel doors opened to the outside world, she stood, shaky but unbroken, ready to face whatever came next. The story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Days passed in a blur, filled with quiet moments and endless questions. She sifted through memories and conversations, searching for pieces that might explain the chaos. Then, little by little, fragments of the truth began to surface, not from him, but from others who knew things he never shared. Stories that didn't fit the picture he painted. She learned that the past was tangled in misunderstandings and pain on both sides, more complex than she ever imagined. The man she thought was pure revenge was also a victim of his own wounds. His life had been shattered long before they met, betrayals and losses that left scars invisible to the casual observer. It wasn't an excuse, but it was a key to understanding. She found herself standing at a crossroads between anger and empathy. Could someone so broken still be capable of love? And if so, what did that mean for her? She remembered how he'd looked at her sometimes, those rare moments when the mask slipped, revealing vulnerability beneath the hardness. It was a glimpse into a man who had been trapped by his own story. And in that glimpse, she saw something fragile and real. The idea that maybe, despite everything, he had fallen for her too, slowly, quietly, in ways he never admitted out loud. Her own heart was a tangle of conflicting emotions. Betrayal fought against forgiveness. Hurt wrestled with hope. It was messy, uncomfortable, and deeply human. She realized that love, especially when built on broken foundations, is rarely simple or clean. It requires confronting pain, asking difficult questions, and sometimes accepting imperfect truths. In the quiet of her apartment, she found herself journaling, putting down thoughts she hadn't dared voice. Writing became a mirror, reflecting her journey from confusion to clarity. She read books about healing from betrayal and navigating complicated relationships. Titles like The Gifts of Imperfection by Brené Brown and Attached by Amir Levine offered insights she desperately needed. These tools helped her start to piece together not just what happened, but what she wanted moving forward. She reached out cautiously to some of the people involved, seeking answers without judgment. The conversations were painful but revealing. She learned about motivations, mistakes, and moments of regret. Sometimes, the truth was messy, filled with human flaws and contradictions. But every revelation chipped away at the black and white story she'd held onto, replacing it with something more real. With each discovery, her perspective shifted. She saw herself not just as a victim, but as someone with agency, a woman who could choose how to respond to this chaos. The path to healing was hers to define. And that realization sparked a quiet strength she hadn't expected to find so soon. Though the past remained tangled, she understood now that her story wasn't finished. There was room for growth, for forgiveness, and maybe, someday, for peace. The altar confession was just one chapter. Her next steps would be about reclaiming her life and writing the rest of her story on her own terms. The days after the storm were the hardest she'd ever faced. Every morning she woke up with a heavy heart, the weight of betrayal pressing down like an anchor. The whispers of, "Why me?" echoed relentlessly. But deep inside, something refused to break. She stood at a crossroads, facing a choice that would define the rest of her life: remain a victim, crushed by the pain and shame, or rise as a survivor, stronger and wiser than before. Choosing survival wasn't about ignoring the hurt. It meant embracing it, sitting with it, learning from it. She remembered stories of women who had walked similar paths, like Malala Yousafzai, who turned her suffering into a powerful voice for change, or Oprah Winfrey, who transformed hardship into empathy and strength. Their journeys reminded her that pain can be a teacher, not just a prison. She began to reclaim herself, little by little. Simple acts became revolutionary. Taking long walks to clear her mind, journaling to untangle emotions, setting boundaries with those who brought toxicity. She sought therapy, understanding that healing often requires guidance. She surrounded herself with people who lifted her up rather than tore her down, discovering the power of community in recovery. At times, the past tried to pull her back. Memories resurfaced like shadows at dusk, tempting her to doubt her worth and question her future. But each time, she reminded herself that her story was no longer written by someone else's betrayal. It was hers to tell. She found strength in affirmations, in small victories, and in the knowledge that resilience grows from the cracks of brokenness. She also learned forgiveness, not for him, but for herself. Forgiveness as a way to release the poison of anger that could otherwise consume her. It was a slow, messy process, but essential. Holding on to bitterness would only trap her in the past, while forgiveness offered a chance at freedom and peace. Her final decision became clear: she would not be defined by this chapter. She was more than a betrayed bride or a wounded heart. She was a woman rising, learning, and moving forward with purpose. The scars remained, but they no longer held her captive. Instead, they became marks of strength, proof that she had faced darkness and chosen light. And as she looked in the mirror, she saw not just the woman who had walked down the aisle in pain, but the one who was stepping boldly into her future. A future shaped by courage, self-love, and hope. Because some stories don't end where the pain begins, they begin where the truth is embraced and the soul decides to soar. The altar was just the beginning of her real journey, a journey not defined by revenge or heartbreak, but by growth and transformation. And that decision, it was hers. Always hers. Sometimes, the hardest betrayals teach us the greatest lessons about trust, strength, and choosing ourselves first. Remember, your story isn't defined by the pain you face, but by how you rise after it. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. There are many more powerful journeys waiting to inspire you.